Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the brand new Insidious movie, Insidious Out of the Further, and what this movie is actually about. Before we continue, here's your spoiler alert. I'll be discussing the movie's main story and supernatural mythology, so if you haven't watched it yet and want to go in completely blind, this is your warning. Insidious Out of the Further introduces a completely new family to the franchise, while bringing back one very familiar face, Elise Rainier, played by Lynn Shy. The story follows Gemma, a young mother who lives with her daughter Maya in the same house where Gemma grew up. At first, it seems like Gemma is simply trying to create a better childhood for her daughter than the one she experienced herself. But the house has a dark history. Gemma's childhood was deeply affected by her troubled mother Ingrid and the trauma surrounding her mother's death. As Gemma begins uncovering things from her past, she also discovers a connection to the supernatural world known as the Further. And this is where the movie introduces its biggest new idea. Gemma isn't simply someone who can enter the Further. She has an ability that makes her extremely different from the astral travelers we've seen in previous Insidious movies. She can actually bring things from the Further back into the real world. That changes everything. The Further has always been presented as a terrifying realm filled with lost souls and dangerous entities. Characters like Dalton and Elise have entered this realm before, but usually the danger comes from what happens when someone travels into it. This time, the danger works in the opposite direction. The things living inside the Further can come out. And once the entities realize what Gemma is capable of, they begin using her power as a way to reach the real world. That's why the title, Out of the Further, is so important. The horror isn't just about someone going into the Further anymore. It's about what happens when the Further starts coming out. Gemma's ability is also connected to her family. The movie reveals that this unusual gift isn't necessarily something that began with her. Her daughter Maya and Gemma's mother Ingrid are also connected to this supernatural ability, suggesting that Gemma's family has a much deeper relationship with the Further than she originally realized. And this is where the movie expands the mythology of the franchise. Instead of treating the Further as simply another haunted dimension, the movie explores what could happen if the boundary between that world and ours begins to collapse. Gemma is suddenly caught in the middle. She wants to protect Maya, but the very ability that makes her special is also what makes her dangerous to the people around her. And of course, this is where Elise becomes important. Lynn Shy returns as Elise Rainier, giving the new story a direct connection to the earlier Insidious movies. Elise understands the Further better than almost anyone, so her involvement gives Gemma someone who can help her understand what is happening. But Gemma isn't simply fighting one ghost or one demon. She's dealing with a much larger supernatural threat that could allow multiple entities to cross into the real world. That's why the title, Out of the Further, is so important. The horror isn't just about someone going into the Further anymore. It's about what happens when the Further starts coming out. Gemma's ability is also connected to her family. The movie reveals that this unusual gift isn't necessarily something that began with her. Her daughter Maya and Gemma's mother Ingrid are also connected to this supernatural ability, suggesting that Gemma's family has a much deeper relationship with the Further than she originally realized. And this is where the movie expands the mythology of the franchise. Instead of treating the Further as simply another haunted dimension, the movie explores what could happen if the boundary between that world and ours begins to collapse. Gemma is suddenly caught in the middle. She wants to protect Maya, but the very ability that makes her special is also what makes her dangerous to the people around her. And of course, this is where Elise becomes important. Lynn Shy returns as Elise Rainier, giving the new story a direct connection to the earlier Insidious movies. Elise understands the Further better than almost anyone, so her involvement gives Gemma someone who can help her understand what is happening. But Gemma isn't simply fighting one ghost or one demon. She's dealing with a much larger supernatural threat that could allow multiple entities to cross into the real world. That's what makes this movie different from some of the earlier Insidious films. The threat isn't limited to one person being haunted anymore. The real problem is the boundary between our world and the Further itself, and that creates a much bigger danger. If Gemma can bring things out of the further, what happens when something truly powerful finds a way through? That's the question at the heart of Insidious Out of the Further. Gemma isn't simply trying to survive a haunting. She's trying to protect her daughter while discovering that the supernatural ability running through her family could actually become a doorway for dangerous entities. And the more Gemma learns about her family's connection to the further, the more she realizes that this isn't something she can simply ignore or run away from. Her connection to the further is part of who she is, but that same connection could put everyone around her in danger. This is also where the movie becomes important to the larger Insidious mythology. The franchise has always treated the further as a mysterious realm filled with lost souls, demons, and other supernatural entities. Usually, the danger comes from people entering that world. Characters like Elise, Dalton, and others have had to travel into the further to rescue people or confront whatever was waiting for them. But Out of the Further changes that idea. This time, the danger can travel in the opposite direction. The further can reach back into our world. And once that connection becomes possible, the rules completely change. The real world is no longer a safe place simply because you're not inside the further. Something from that realm could potentially cross over. And that's what makes Gemma's ability so dangerous. She isn't just connected to the further. She can potentially become the bridge between the two worlds. That means the supernatural entities don't necessarily have to wait for someone to enter their realm. They can use Gemma's connection to find a way out. And that creates a much bigger conflict than a traditional haunted house story. Gemma has to figure out how her ability works, why her family possesses this connection, and whether she can control it before something much worse happens. There's also a strong emotional element to the story. At the center of everything is Gemma's relationship with her daughter. She's not fighting simply because she wants to survive. She's fighting because she wants to protect her child from the same darkness that has followed her family. That makes the supernatural conflict feel much more personal. And then there's Elise. Her return is important because she connects this new story to the original Insidious mythology. Elise has spent years studying the further and dealing with the entities that live there. So when Gemma discovers just how dangerous her ability really is, Elise becomes one of the few people who can help her understand what she's dealing with. But even Elise may not have all the answers. Because if the rules of the further are changing, then everything they thought they understood about that realm could also be changing. And that raises an even bigger question. What happens if the barrier between the two worlds completely breaks? Could the entities trapped in the further begin appearing freely in our world? Could people who have never experienced the further suddenly become vulnerable to it? And could Gemma's family be connected to something much older than they realize? Those questions are what give Out of the Further its larger mythology. It's not simply another story about a family moving into a haunted house. It's about the relationship between two worlds and what happens when that relationship becomes unstable. The further has always been terrifying because of what waits inside it. But this movie introduces an even scarier possibility. What if the thing we should really be afraid of isn't entering the further? What if it's what happens when the further starts coming out? That's ultimately what makes Insidious Out of the Further an important new chapter for the franchise. It takes an idea we've seen before and reverses it. Instead of asking whether Gemma can survive the further, the bigger question becomes whether she can stop the further from reaching everyone else. And with Elise back in the story, the movie has a direct connection to the mythology that made Insidious so popular in the first place. So at its core, this is a story about family, supernatural abilities, and a dangerous connection between two worlds. Gemma is trying to protect her daughter. The entities are trying to escape, and the further may no longer be willing to stay where it belongs. The biggest question isn't simply whether Gemma can escape the further, it's whether she can prevent the further from escaping into our world.